The police officer didn't know he was being filmed. What he did with the bear cub left everyone in shock. The endless stretch of Highway 93 cut through the dense forests of Montana like a river of asphalt, its edges blending into the wilderness that seemed to breathe with ancient wisdom. Officer Jack Mitchell had patrolled this remote section of road for the past 15 years, and every day brought something different. But nothing could have prepared him for what he would encounter on this crisp autumn morning. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Let us know which city you're watching us from. Stay with us. The sun had barely begun to peek through the towering pines when Jack noticed something unusual moving across the road ahead. Slowing his patrol car, he squinted through the morning mist. His heart skipped a beat when he realized what it was. A baby bear, barely old enough to walk, stumbling across the highway with uncertain steps. Without hesitation, Jack flipped on his emergency lights and brought his vehicle to a stop. The little bear, clearly exhausted and disoriented, could barely keep its balance. Though traffic was sparse on this stretch of road, any passing vehicle could spell disaster for the vulnerable creature. "Easy there, little one," Jack whispered to himself as he carefully stepped out of his patrol car. 15 years of wildlife encounters had taught him to be cautious, but something about this situation felt different. The cub's evident distress tugged at his heartstrings in a way he couldn't ignore. As he approached, Jack noticed how the morning dew had matted the cub's fur, making it appear even smaller and more helpless. He knelt slowly, maintaining a respectful distance while assessing the situation. The forest around them seemed unusually quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle Montana breeze. Unknown to Jack, Sarah Thompson, a local wildlife photographer, had pulled up behind his patrol car. Silently, she began recording the scene on her phone, captivated by the tenderness of the moment. The morning light cast a golden glow around the officer and the bear cub, creating what would soon become an image that would touch hearts across the nation. Jack's trained eye scanned the surrounding forest for any sign of the mother bear. But the woods remained still. Years of experience told him something wasn't right. Bear cubs this young never strayed far from their mothers, and this one's behavior seemed particularly unusual. As he edged closer, the cub turned its head toward him, its small eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and exhaustion. Jack's heart melted at the sight. In all his years of service, he'd never felt such an immediate connection with a wild animal. The cub's vulnerability struck a chord deep within him, reminding him of why he'd chosen this career in the first place, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The morning air grew thick with tension as Jack weighed his options. Protocol dictated minimal interference with wildlife, but leaving the cub in its current state seemed unconscionable. The highway, though quiet now, would soon be busy with morning commuters and logging trucks. A sound from the forest caught his attention, a distant rustling that could have been anything from a squirrel to a larger animal. Jack remained still, his years of training keeping him alert while maintaining his calm demeanor. The cub, however, seemed to perk up at the sound, its ears twitching in response. Sarah continued filming, her photographer's instinct telling her she was capturing something extraordinary. The interplay between the uniformed officer and the vulnerable wild creature spoke to something fundamental about humanity's relationship with nature. Little did she know that her footage would soon become the center of a controversy that would shake the small Montana community to its core. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the trees, Jack made a decision that would change his life forever. He couldn't simply leave the cub to its fate on the highway. With gentle movements, he reached out toward the exhausted animal, his heart racing but his hands steady. The forest seemed to hold its breath as human and wild creature connected in an unexpected moment of trust. Sarah Thompson's hands trembled as she uploaded the video to her social media accounts. As a wildlife photographer with a modest following, she'd shared countless moments of natural beauty before, but this was different. The tenderness displayed by Officer Mitchell toward the vulnerable bear cub had touched something deep within her, and she felt compelled to share it with the world. Within hours, the video had taken on a life of its own. It spread across social media platforms like wildfire, garnering millions of views and shares. Local news stations in Montana picked up the story first, but by nightfall, national networks were running the footage. The image of the uniformed officer kneeling beside the helpless cub resonated with people across the country. However, as the video circulated, something disturbing began to happen. A heavily edited version appeared online, cutting out crucial context and adding ominous background music. This altered version suggested that Officer Mitchell had been harassing the cub rather than helping it. The editing was subtle but effective, turning a moment of compassion into something sinister. Back at the Glacier County Sheriff's Department, Chief Sandra Warner called Jack into her office. The seasoned officer sat across from his superior, still wearing his patrol uniform from his morning shift. The weight of the situation was evident in the chief's expression. "Jack, have you seen what's happening online?" Sandra asked, turning her computer monitor toward him. The screen displayed multiple news articles and social media posts, some praising his actions, others condemning them. The controversy was spreading faster than anyone could have anticipated. "I was just doing my job, Chief," Jack replied, his voice steady despite the growing knot in his stomach. "That cub was in danger. I couldn't just leave it there." Sandra leaned back in her chair, her expression grave. "I know your heart was in the right place, but this situation is getting complicated. Environmental groups are demanding an investigation. They're claiming you interfered with wildlife without proper authority." The news hit Jack like a physical blow. In 15 years of service, his record had been spotless. He'd always prided himself on being a by-the-book officer who also knew when compassion was needed. Now his career hung in the balance because of one act of kindness. Meanwhile, Sarah was dealing with her own crisis of conscience. Her original video had been meant to celebrate an act of humanity, not destroy a good man's career. She watched in horror as her footage was twisted and manipulated, spawning countless conspiracy theories and accusations. Determined to set things right, Sarah began reaching out to her contacts in the wildlife photography community. Something about the edited version of the video bothered her. It seemed professionally done, too polished to be the work of a random internet troll. As the day progressed, the situation grew more tense. Chief Warner received pressure from higher up to take action. Despite her personal belief in Jack's innocence, she had no choice but to place him on administrative leave pending an investigation. "I'm sorry, Jack," she said, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "It's temporary. Just until we can sort this out. You know how these things work." Jack nodded, understanding the position his superior was in, but the injustice of it all burned in his chest. As he handed over his badge and service weapon, his mind went back to the little cub. Had he made the right choice? Would anyone else have done anything different in his position? As he walked out of the station, reporters had already begun to gather. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees. Jack kept his head down, ignoring the shouted questions as he made his way to his personal vehicle. At home, Jack sat in his darkened living room, the TV muted, but playing endless loops of the viral video, both the original and the edited version. The contrast between reality and this manufactured controversy was staggering. But something else nagged at him, a detail from that morning that he couldn't quite place. Something about the cub's behavior, about the strange silence in the forest, felt orchestrated, as if he had stumbled into a situation that was far more complex than a simple wildlife encounter. The morning after his suspension, Jack woke to an unexpected call. Tom Reynolds, a local wildlife biologist he'd known for years, wanted to meet urgently at the Hungry Bear Diner just outside of town. As Jack drove through the misty Montana morning, his mind raced with possibilities. Tom had always been a straight shooter, someone who understood the delicate balance between human intervention and wildlife preservation. The diner was nearly empty when Jack arrived, save for a few early morning regulars nursing their coffee. Tom sat in a corner booth, his usual field notebook open beside his untouched breakfast. The worried lines around his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much. "Jack," Tom began as soon as they were settled, "something's not right about this whole situation. I've been tracking bear movements in this area for the past decade, and what you encountered doesn't add up." Jack leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. "What do you mean?" Tom pulled out several maps marked with tracking data. "We've had reports of unusual bear behavior in that sector for the past month. Cubs separated from mothers, adult bears acting erratically. At first, we thought it might be natural causes, but now..." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Linda Hawkins, a local rancher whose property bordered the national forest. She approached their table with purpose, her weathered face tight with concern. "I couldn't help overhearing," she said, sliding into the booth next to Tom. "And I think I might have something to add. The night before you found that cub, Officer Mitchell, I saw something strange near my property line, a vehicle with its lights off, moving through the Forest Service road." Jack's law enforcement instincts kicked in despite his suspension. "Did you get a look at it?" Linda shook her head. "Too dark, but I did notice it had some kind of special equipment mounted on top. Thought it was Forest Service at first, but they never drive without lights." Tom's expression darkened. "That fits with something else I've been worried about. We've found unusual traces in some areas. Signs of human activity where there shouldn't be any. Professional gear, the kind used for tracking and capturing wildlife." As they talked, Sarah Thompson was conducting her own investigation. Her background in wildlife photography had given her extensive contacts in the conservation community, and what she was hearing troubled her deeply. Other photographers had reported seeing suspicious activity in the area, but their concerns had been dismissed as paranoid ramblings. Back at the diner, Jack was beginning to see a pattern emerge. The cub's behavior, the mysterious vehicle, the professional quality of the edited video. It all pointed to something organized, something calculated. Linda leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's more. My grandson Billy, he's always hiking in those woods. Last week he found something odd, some kind of electronic device attached to a tree. When he went back the next day to show me, it was gone." Tom quickly flipped through his notebook. "That matches the timeline of when we started noticing disrupted bear movement patterns. Something or someone is deliberately interfering with their natural behavior." Jack felt a familiar surge of determination, the same feeling that had driven him to help the cub. Despite his suspension, he couldn't ignore what he was hearing. Years of law enforcement experience told him they were looking at something bigger than a simple case of wildlife interference. Sarah, meanwhile, had made a breakthrough of her own. Analyzing her original footage frame by frame, she noticed something. In the background, a brief flash of movement in the trees, too deliberate to be natural. She immediately called the station, asking to speak with Officer Mitchell, only to learn of his suspension. As the morning wore on, Jack, Tom, and Linda pieced together more of the puzzle. The pattern that emerged was troubling. Systematic disruption of wildlife behavior, professional surveillance equipment, and now a coordinated attempt to discredit anyone who might stumble upon the truth. "Whatever's going on," Jack said finally, pushing away his cold coffee, "it's not random. That cub was placed there, I'm sure of it now. The question is, why?" Linda glanced nervously out the diner window. The bigger question might be, who are we really dealing with? These people, whoever they are, they've got resources, technology. They managed to turn the whole town against you overnight. Tom closed his notebook with a decisive snap. We need to be careful how we proceed. These people clearly know what they're doing, and they've already shown they're willing to destroy reputations to protect their operation. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the Montana pines as Sarah Thompson reviewed her footage for the 100th time. Her small home office was covered in printouts of video frames, each showing different angles of that fateful morning. But it was a new detail that caught her eye, something she hadn't noticed before. In the background, partially hidden by the morning mist, there was a reflection of what appeared to be a camera lens. Meanwhile, Jack Mitchell had taken Tom Reynolds up on his offer to review the wildlife tracking data. They sat in Tom's modest research station, surrounded by maps and monitoring equipment. The station, a converted cabin on the edge of the national forest, provided the perfect vantage point for observing the surrounding wilderness. "Look at these movement patterns," Tom said, pointing to a series of marked locations on a digital map. "Bears don't behave like this naturally. These are deliberate disruptions of their habitats, forcing them into specific areas." Jack leaned closer to the screen, his law enforcement training kicking in. "They're creating corridors," he realized, herding the wildlife into predictable paths. Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent knock at the door. Linda Hawkins burst in, out of breath and clutching her tablet. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a series of security camera footage from her ranch. "I installed these cameras after the strange vehicle sighting, and look what they caught last night." The grainy nighttime footage showed a sophisticated drone flying low over her property, its infrared sensors clearly visible. "That's military-grade equipment," Jack noted, his concern growing. "Not something your average citizen can get their hands on." As they studied the footage, Sarah was making her own breakthrough. She'd reached out to her network of wildlife photographers and received an intriguing response from Marcus Chen, a photographer who'd been documenting bear behavior in the area for months. "I've got dozens of photos showing similar patterns," Marcus explained over a video call. "Bears being pushed out of their natural territories, cubs separated from mothers. I thought I was imagining things at first, but after your video went viral, it all started making sense." Back at the research station, Tom was overlaying various data sets on his computer. "The timing of these disturbances isn't random," he explained to Jack and Linda. "They follow a precise schedule, almost like they're coordinating something," Jack finished, the pieces starting to click into place. "But what's the end game? Why go to all this trouble?" Linda pulled out her phone, showing them a series of photos her grandson had taken during his hikes. "Billy's been noticing strange markers in the trees, like someone's mapping out routes through the forest. And look at this." She zoomed in on one image showing a sophisticated tracking collar half hidden under fallen leaves. The discovery sent a chill through the room. These weren't the tools of poachers or amateur wildlife enthusiasts. This was professional-grade equipment being used for something far more calculated. Sarah, following her own lead, had begun compiling a timeline of unusual events in the area. The edited video that had discredited Jack wasn't an isolated incident. Similar smear campaigns had targeted other local officials and researchers who had gotten too close to whatever was happening in these woods. As the day progressed, more pieces of the puzzle emerged. Tom's research colleagues reported similar patterns in neighboring counties. Linda's rancher friends shared stories of mysterious equipment failures and unexplained disruptions to their security systems. Jack, though still suspended, felt his investigative instincts sharpen. The cub he'd encountered hadn't been lost. It had been placed there deliberately, a pawn in some larger scheme, but proving it would require more than just circumstantial evidence. "We need to document everything," he insisted, helping Tom organize their findings. "Every unusual sighting, every piece of equipment found, every disrupted bear pattern. There's a connection here, and we're going to find it." Sarah, working independently but reaching similar conclusions, had started mapping the locations of all reported incidents. A pattern was emerging, one that suggested this wasn't just about wildlife. The affected areas formed a strategic corridor through some of Montana's most remote wilderness. As evening approached, Linda received an urgent text from Billy. He'd found something else during his afternoon hike. Fresh tracks and signs of recent human activity near an abandoned ranger station. The location perfectly aligned with the pattern they'd been tracking. "Whatever's going on," Jack said, studying the map one last time before darkness fell. "That ranger station might be our best chance to understand it. But we need to be smart about this. These people have already shown they're willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their operation." The abandoned ranger station stood like a forgotten sentinel in the gathering dusk. Jack Mitchell, Tom Reynolds, and Linda Hawkins approached cautiously, their footsteps muffled by years of accumulated pine needles. The building's weathered exterior betrayed no signs of recent activity, but they knew better than to trust appearances. Sarah Thompson, who had insisted on joining them after sharing her findings, kept her camera ready. Years of wildlife photography had taught her to capture evidence without being noticed. Her professional instincts told her they were on the verge of discovering something significant. "Look at this," Tom whispered, pointing to seemingly random marks on the trees surrounding the station. To an untrained eye, they might appear natural, but his years of wildlife research told a different story. "These are navigation markers, professional ones. Someone's been using this place as a base of operations." As they circled the building, Linda noticed something odd about the ground. "These tracks," she said, kneeling to examine the soil. "They're fresh, multiple people, heavy equipment, can't be more than a day old." Jack's training kicked in as he assessed the situation. The station's windows were covered with what appeared to be standard plywood, but closer inspection revealed sophisticated security sensors hidden in the frames. "This isn't just some makeshift operation," he muttered. "This is professional-grade equipment." Sarah's camera clicked quietly as she documented everything: the tracks, the markers, the hidden security measures. Her earlier discovery of the edited video that had discredited Jack seemed to connect directly to what they were finding here. A sudden rustling in the undergrowth made them freeze. Through the trees, they caught glimpses of movement, a large bear moving with purpose, but showing signs of distress. Tom immediately recognized the behavior pattern they'd been tracking. "That's her," he whispered urgently. "The mother bear. She's been circling this area for days, looking for her cub. The one you found on the road, Jack." The revelation hit Jack like a physical blow. The bear's presence wasn't random. She was searching for her stolen cub. The pieces were falling into place: the exhausted cub on the highway, the sophisticated equipment, the coordinated smear campaign against him. Linda's phone buzzed quietly, a text from Billy. He'd been keeping watch from a ridge overlooking the access road and had spotted vehicles approaching. They needed to move, fast. Inside the station, accessed through a window, Tom knew how to jimmy from his ranger days. They found what they were looking for. The interior had been converted into a high-tech monitoring station. Maps covered the walls, marked with detailed wildlife movement patterns. Sophisticated tracking equipment hummed quietly in the corner. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed, photographing everything. "They've been monitoring every major animal movement in the region. But why?" Jack's eyes were drawn to a particular map, larger than the others. It showed the entire region, with highlighted corridors cutting through public and private land. Notes in the margins referred to acquisition targets and clearing zones. They're not just tracking the wildlife, he realized, studying the annotations. They're systematically manipulating their movements, creating artificial migration patterns. Tom was examining a stack of documents left on a desk. "These are land surveys," he said, his voice tight with concern. "Environmental impact assessments. Someone's planning something big here, something that requires the wildlife to be relocated." A sound from outside made them all tense. Through the grimy windows, they could see headlights approaching through the trees. Linda's phone lit up with another warning from Billy. Multiple vehicles were converging on their location. "We need to document everything and get out," Jack said firmly, his protective instincts taking over. "Sarah, get as many photos as you can. Tom, grab any papers that look important. Linda, keep watching that access road." As they worked quickly in the fading light, the magnitude of what they discovered began to sink in. This wasn't just about one bear cub or a viral video. They'd stumbled onto something much larger, a coordinated effort to manipulate the entire ecosystem for some yet unknown purpose. Sarah's camera worked frantically, capturing every detail she could. The equipment, the maps, the documents, everything that might help prove what was really happening in these woods. But the approaching vehicles meant their time was running out. "There's something else," Tom said suddenly, examining a logbook he'd found. "These entries, they match perfectly with the timeline of when the bear cub was found. This wasn't a coincidence, Jack. They wanted someone to find that cub. They needed a distraction." The next morning dawned with an air of urgency at Tom's research station. Sarah's photographs from the abandoned ranger station were spread across his desk, while Linda and Jack pored over the documents they'd managed to gather before their hasty retreat. The evidence painted a disturbing picture of systematic wildlife manipulation across the entire region. "Look at these shipping manifests," Linda said, pointing to a series of dates and locations. "They match perfectly with the times Billy saw. Those strange vehicles, they've been moving equipment in and out of the forest for months." Tom was cross-referencing the data with his wildlife tracking records. "Every time they moved equipment, we recorded unusual bear activity. They've been deliberately disrupting established territories, forcing the animals into new patterns." Sarah, who had spent the night processing her photographs, called them over to her laptop. "These surveillance photos show something even more concerning," she said, zooming in on a series of images. "They've set up a network of hidden cameras and sensors throughout the forest. That's how they knew exactly when to plant that bear cub for Jack to find." The mention of the cub brought a troubled expression to Jack's face. Despite his suspension, his law enforcement instincts were working overtime. "They needed a distraction," he said, thinking out loud. "Something to keep attention focused on me while they moved forward with whatever they're planning." A knock at the door made them all freeze. Through the window, they could see Chief Sandra Warner standing on the porch, alone. Jack moved to answer, his heart pounding. "I think you all need to see this," Sandra said without preamble, stepping inside. She pulled out her tablet and played a video, security footage from a gas station near the highway where Jack had found the cub. The timestamp showed a large vehicle stopping briefly in the pre-dawn hours that morning. "This was sent to me anonymously," Sandra explained. "Watch what happens next." The grainy footage showed several figures unloading something from the vehicle. Something that moved, the cub, clearly sedated, being placed near the highway. "I've seen enough," Sandra said, stopping the video. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to set you up, Jack. The question is, why?" Linda spread out a map she'd brought from her ranch. "These markers show where they've been placing their equipment," she explained, pointing to various locations. "Notice anything strange about the pattern?" They all leaned in, studying the map. The marked locations formed a clear corridor through the wilderness, connecting several key areas of previously undisturbed forest. "They're creating a path," Tom realized, his voice heavy with understanding, "forcing the wildlife out of specific areas but making it look natural. The question is, what are they clearing the way for?" Sarah's phone buzzed with an alert. One of her wildlife photographer contacts had sent her something urgent, Drone footage of large vehicles moving through the forest under cover of darkness, carrying what appeared to be surveying equipment. "Whatever they're planning," she said, showing them the footage, "it's happening soon. They're accelerating their timeline." Jack studied the various pieces of evidence spread before them, the sophisticated equipment at the ranger station, the coordinated wildlife manipulation, the elaborate setup to discredit him. It all pointed to something massive in scale. "We need to compile all of this," he said firmly. "Every photo, every document, every piece of footage, but we have to be smart about how we use it. These people have already shown they're willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their operation." Sandra nodded in agreement. "I can help with that. Now that I've seen this evidence, I can't ignore what's happening, but we need to be careful. One wrong move, and they'll bury this deeper than we can dig." A distant sound caught their attention, the distinctive whir of drone rotors. They rushed to the windows, watching as a small drone passed overhead, its camera clearly visible. "They're watching us," Linda whispered, her face pale. "They know we were at the ranger station." "Let them watch," Jack said, his determination growing stronger. "We've got something they don't expect, proof, and more importantly, we know about the mother bear. She's the key to exposing everything they've done." Tom pulled up his latest wildlife tracking data. "She's still in the area searching for her cub. If we can document her behavior, prove that the cub was deliberately separated from her." "It's not just about one bear family anymore," Sarah added, her camera clutched tightly in her hands. "It's about exposing a systematic attack on the entire ecosystem, but we need to move fast." The Montana wilderness held its secrets close, but Sarah Thompson knew that every story had its breaking point. She'd spent the last 3 days strategically placing her wildlife cameras around the areas where the mother bear had been spotted. If their theory was correct, the bear's behavior would prove that the cub's appearance on the highway had been orchestrated. Meanwhile, Jack Mitchell and Tom Reynolds had been meticulously documenting every piece of evidence they'd gathered. Chief Sandra Warner had provided them with a secure room at the station's evidence lockup, away from prying eyes. The walls were covered with photos, maps, and diagrams, all connecting to form a disturbing pattern of wildlife manipulation. "These satellite images confirm it," Tom said, pointing to a series of time-stamped photos. The bear's natural migration patterns were systematically disrupted. Look at how the corridors were created, forcing them away from their traditional territories. Linda Hawkins burst into the room, clutching her tablet. "You need to see this," she said breathlessly. "Billy's been monitoring those surveillance devices we found. They're not just tracking bears, they're using sophisticated sound equipment to drive them away from specific areas." Jack studied the new information, his law enforcement training helping him piece together the larger picture. They needed to clear these areas without leaving obvious signs of human intervention. Make it look like the wildlife was naturally moving away. Sarah's phone chimed with an alert from one of her cameras. The mother bear had been spotted again, and this time her behavior was telling. The footage showed her methodically searching specific areas, following a pattern that exactly matched the corridors they'd discovered on the maps. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice tight with excitement. "This proves the separation wasn't natural. She's not searching randomly. She's being forced to follow their manufactured pathways." Chief Warner examined the footage carefully. "This could be enough to reopen the investigation into Jack's suspension, but we need to move carefully. These people have resources, and they've already shown they can manipulate public opinion." Just then, Tom's computer pinged with an alert. His wildlife monitoring system had detected unusual activity near the old ranger station. "Multiple heat signatures," he reported, studying the thermal imaging. "They're moving equipment again, but this time they're in a hurry." Linda's ranch security cameras had picked up something too. Several unmarked vehicles moving through the back roads headed toward the national forest. They're accelerating their timeline, she realized. They know we're onto them. Sarah made a quick decision. I'm going back out there, she announced, gathering her camera gear. If they're moving equipment, we need to document it. This could be our chance to catch them in the act. So, not alone you're not, Jack said firmly. Though still suspended, his protective instincts were as sharp as ever. We do this smart. We do this together. Chief Warner nodded her approval. I'll coordinate from here. If anything goes wrong, I can have backup there in 20 minutes. But remember, we need clear, undeniable evidence. No risks, no confrontations. Tom pulled up a topographical map on his computer. There's an old fire observation point overlooking the area where they've been most active. Perfect vantage point, and they won't expect anyone to be up there. And as they prepared to move out, Linda received another text from Billy. The drone activity over her property had increased dramatically in the past hour. They're searching for something, she said, showing them the footage. Or someone. The Mother Bear, Sarah realized. She's getting too close to their operation. They need to relocate her before she exposes their whole scheme. Jack studied the map one final time, memorizing the terrain. We've got one shot at this, he said quietly. If we can document their attempts to move the bear, prove that they've been manipulating wildlife movements all along. Chief Warner placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. Get the evidence we need, and I'll handle the rest. It's time to clear your name and expose whatever they're trying to hide in our forests. As they loaded their gear into Tom's research vehicle, Sarah's cameras caught one last piece of crucial evidence, the mother bear moving with clear purpose toward the area where they'd first found her cub. Nature, it seemed, had its own way of revealing the truth. Ready? Jack asked, looking at his unlikely team of allies. Sarah checked her cameras one last time. Sometimes the best stories are the ones that find us, she said, her professional instincts telling her they were on the verge of something big. Let's go write the ending to this one. The old fire observation point provided a perfect panoramic view of the valley below. Sarah had set up her cameras strategically, while Tom monitored the wildlife tracking equipment they'd brought. Jack and Linda maintained watch on either side, their eyes scanning the darkening forest for any sign of movement. Movement at 2 o'clock, Tom whispered suddenly, adjusting his infrared scanner. Large heat signature. It's the mother bear. She's following the exact pattern we predicted. Sarah's cameras whirred quietly, capturing everything. The bear's movements were deliberate, following the artificial corridors they'd discovered. But something else caught their attention. A series of subtle flashes in the underbrush. Those are their automated deterrent systems, Linda explained, recognizing the pattern. They're trying to herd her away from the eastern sector. Jack's trained eye noticed something else. Look at the timing of those flashes. They're not random. They're coordinated with the bear's movements. They're actively monitoring and manipulating her behavior in real time. Sarah zoomed in with her telephoto lens, capturing clear images of the sophisticated equipment hidden in the trees. This is beyond anything we imagined, she breathed. They've turned the entire forest into a controlled environment. Suddenly, Tom's equipment picked up new signals. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north, he reported, checking his displays. And they're carrying more of that specialized equipment we found at the ranger station. Through her camera's viewfinder, Sarah could see the vehicles clearly now. Unmarked trucks carrying what appeared to be wildlife transport cages and more deterrent systems. They're expanding their operation, she realized, getting ready for something bigger. Linda's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Billy. He'd spotted more vehicles approaching from the other direction, effectively creating a wall of activity that would force any wildlife in the area to move along their predetermined paths. Wait, Jack said suddenly, pointing to a clearing below. Look at what they're unloading. Those aren't just deterrent systems. They're setting up some kind of permanent infrastructure. Sarah's cameras clicked rapidly, documenting everything. The sophisticated nature of the equipment, the coordinated movements of the vehicles, the strategic placement of devices, it all pointed to a massive, well-funded operation. Tom was cross-referencing the activity with his wildlife data. Every time they install one of those systems, it creates a new dead zone in animal movement patterns. They're literally reshaping the entire ecosystem. A sudden commotion below drew their attention. The mother bear had encountered one of their deterrent systems, and her reaction was exactly what they'd been waiting for. She displayed clear signs of previous exposure to these devices, proving this wasn't her first encounter with their equipment. "This is it," Sarah whispered excitedly, her cameras capturing every moment. "This proves they've been manipulating her movements for weeks, long before Jack found the cub. They deliberately separated them as part of their plan." Chief Warner's voice crackled quietly over their secure radio. "Are you getting all this?" she asked, her tone urgent but controlled. "Every second," Sarah confirmed. "Clear evidence of systematic wildlife manipulation, unauthorized equipment installation, and deliberate disruption of protected species. Everything we need to prove Jack's innocence and expose their entire operation." The mother bear's behavior had become increasingly distressed, searching for ways around the artificial barriers they'd created. Her movements matched exactly with the patterns they'd documented in their evidence. Proof that this was a long-term, coordinated effort to control wildlife movement in the area. "Look at these new thermal readings," Tom said suddenly, pointing to his screen. "They're setting up some kind of perimeter. Whatever they're planning, it's happening soon." Linda's phone lit up with another message from Billy. He'd managed to get closer to one of the trucks and had spotted official-looking documents in the cab. "Corporate logos," she read from his text. "Something about Phase 2 implementation." Jack processed all the information with his investigator's mindset. They needed me out of the way, he realized. A suspended officer asking questions would be easier to dismiss than an active one. That's why they went to such lengths to discredit me after I found the cub. Sarah's cameras suddenly picked up. New movement, more vehicles arriving, these ones carrying what appeared to be survey equipment and construction markers. "This isn't just about moving wildlife," she said, the realization dawning. "They're clearing the way for something much bigger." The evidence they'd gathered painted a clear picture, a systematic effort to manipulate the forest's ecosystem, using the bear cub as an unwitting pawn in their larger scheme. Every photo, every thermal reading, every documented pattern added another piece to the puzzle. Back at the sheriff's department, Chief Sandra Warner stood before a room full of local officials and media representatives. The evidence gathered by Jack and his team was displayed on multiple screens. Sarah's high-resolution photographs, Tom's wildlife tracking data, and Linda's security footage, all telling the same compelling story. "What you're about to see," Sandra began, her voice steady and authoritative, "represents weeks of systematic wildlife manipulation in our protected forests. This evidence will demonstrate conclusively that Officer Mitchell's encounter with the bear cub was not a random event, but part of a carefully orchestrated plan." Sarah stepped forward, presenting her photographic evidence. The images were damning. Crystal-clear shots of sophisticated equipment being installed, wildlife deterrent systems in action, and most importantly, the mother bear's documented behavior patterns showing clear signs of manipulation. These photos prove that the bear cub Officer Mitchell encountered was deliberately placed on that highway, Sarah explained, highlighting key details in her images. The timing, location, and the cub's condition were all carefully planned to create a specific outcome. Tom Reynolds followed with his scientific analysis. His presentation showed detailed maps of disrupted wildlife patterns, overlaid with the locations of unauthorized equipment and artificial barriers. The correlation was undeniable. "What we're seeing here," Tom explained, pointing to his data, is a deliberate reshaping of natural animal behaviors. These aren't random disruptions, they're calculated movements designed to clear specific areas of the forest. Linda Hawkins presented next, sharing the security footage from her ranch along with Billy's documented observations. The timeline she constructed showed a clear pattern of escalating activity leading up to the day Jack found the cub. These vehicles, she pointed out, were observed in restricted areas multiple times, always operating under cover of darkness. Their movements perfectly matched the installation of wildlife deterrent systems throughout the forest. The room had fallen silent as the evidence mounted. Local reporters were frantically taking notes, while environmental officials exchanged concerned glances. The scale of the manipulation was becoming clear to everyone present. Jack, though still technically suspended, stood at the back of the room, watching as his name was gradually cleared. The original viral video that had caused his suspension was now being shown alongside the unedited footage, revealing the careful manipulation that had turned a moment of compassion into a manufactured scandal. Sarah's wildlife photographer network had come through with additional evidence. Dozens of photos from different sources showed the same pattern of wildlife manipulation across multiple locations. The mother bear's search for her cub had been deliberately prolonged, her movements controlled by hidden deterrent systems. The bear cub incident was designed to serve two purposes, Chief Warner explained, bringing the presentation to its crucial point. First, to discredit Officer Mitchell, removing a potential obstacle to their operations. Second, to create a public distraction while they accelerated their activities in the forest. The original unedited video of Jack's encounter with the cub now played on the main screen. Viewed in its complete context, with the new evidence, it told a very different story. The cub's unusual behavior, the convenient timing, the professional quality of the edited version that had gone viral, it all pointed to a coordinated effort. As the presentation concluded, environmental officials were already making calls. The evidence was too substantial to ignore. Teams were being mobilized to locate and remove the unauthorized equipment from the forest. More importantly, plans were being made to locate and safely reunite the mother bear with her cub. Local media representatives rushed to update their stories. The narrative was shifting dramatically, from a scandal about a police officer's alleged misconduct to the exposure of a large-scale environmental manipulation scheme. Headlines were being rewritten, stories reframed. Jack felt a weight lifting from his shoulders as he watched the truth emerge. His instincts had been right. That morning on the highway, the cub hadn't just been lost, it had been placed there as part of a larger plan. But those responsible hadn't counted on the determination of a small group of people committed to uncovering the truth. Sarah approached him, her camera still in hand. "We're not done yet," she said quietly. "There's still more to this story. The equipment they're installing, the surveys they're conducting, this is just the beginning of whatever they're planning." Tom joined them, holding his latest wildlife tracking data. "The mother bear is still out there," he reminded them. "And now that we've exposed their operation, we need to make sure she's protected while we dismantle their equipment." The Montana morning brought with it a sense of renewed purpose. Environmental protection teams spread throughout the forest, systematically removing the unauthorized equipment that had been used to manipulate wildlife behavior. Jack Mitchell, now fully reinstated to his position, led one of the main search teams focusing on locating the mother bear and her cub. Sarah Thompson's photographs had become the centerpiece of a major environmental investigation. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage of the cleanup operation, while her images were being broadcast on national networks. The story had captured the nation's attention, but this time it was the true version being told. The removal teams have found 17 more deterrent devices just this morning, Tom reported, checking his tablet as he walked alongside Jack. each one strategically placed to create those artificial corridors we documented. The scale of this operation is staggering. Linda Hawkins arrived at their base camp with fresh information from Billy. "He's been monitoring the old ranger station," she said, pulling up a map on her phone. "All their equipment is gone, but they left something behind. Detailed surveys of the entire area. This was never just about wildlife." Chief Warner had called an emergency meeting with state environmental officials. The evidence they'd gathered revealed a complex plan to gradually reshape the forest's ecosystem, clearing the way for some future development project. The bear cub incident had been just one small part of a much larger scheme. Latest thermal imaging shows significant bear activity in Sector 7, Tom announced, studying his wildlife tracking data. The removal of those deterrent devices is already having an effect. The natural movement patterns are starting to restore themselves. Sarah, who had been reviewing her footage from the past few weeks, made an exciting discovery. "Look at this," she said, calling everyone over to her laptop. "These images show the mother bear's behavior changing as we remove each device. She's naturally returning to her traditional territories." The afternoon brought a breakthrough. One of the environmental teams reported finding a hidden storage area containing documents detailing the entire operation. The plans showed how they had intended to gradually push all large wildlife out of specific areas, making it appear as though the animals had naturally migrated away. "They needed it to look natural," Jack explained to a group of environmental officials. "Any sudden disappearance of wildlife would have raised red flags. That's why they went to such lengths to discredit anyone who got too close to discovering their methods." Chief Warner arrived with more good news. The State Environmental Protection Agency had launched a full investigation into the corporations behind the scheme. The evidence they'd gathered was proving invaluable in understanding the scope of the planned environmental manipulation. "The Wildlife Response Team is reporting success in Sector 9, Tom announced, checking his latest updates. "The mother bear's movement patterns are completely natural now. She's no longer being influenced by any artificial deterrents." Sarah's cameras captured the moment they'd all been waiting for. The mother bear, now free from the influence of the deterrent devices, following her natural instincts straight toward the rehabilitation center where her cub was being kept safe. The reunion was approaching, but they needed to ensure it happened under the right conditions. "Everything needs to be done by the book this time," Jack insisted, coordinating with the wildlife experts. "No more interference with their natural behavior. We document everything, but we let nature take its course." Linda's ranch had become a temporary command center for the operation. Environmental officials, wildlife experts, and law enforcement worked together, coordinating their efforts to restore the forest's natural balance. The sophisticated equipment that had been used to manipulate wildlife was being studied, providing crucial evidence for the ongoing investigation. As the day progressed, more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The documentation they'd discovered revealed how the entire operation had been planned, from the strategic placement of deterrent devices to the careful manipulation of public opinion. Jack's encounter with the bear cub had been meant to create a distraction, but instead it had led to the exposure of the entire scheme. "The public response has been overwhelming," Sarah said, showing them the latest news coverage. "People are outraged by the manipulation, but they're inspired by how the community came together to expose the truth. Your reinstatement is being celebrated across the country, Jack. The truth had prevailed, but their work wasn't done. The forest's ecosystem had been disrupted, and it would take time for natural patterns to fully restore themselves. They had prevented future manipulation, but now they needed to ensure the wildlife could return to their natural behaviors without further human interference." The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center buzzed with anticipation as final preparations were made for the reunion. Jack Mitchell stood with Tom Reynolds and Sarah Thompson, watching as wildlife experts made last-minute checks on the young bear cub. The little one had recovered well, showing marked improvement since that fateful morning on the highway. All tracking data shows the mother bear is following her natural instincts now, Tom reported, studying his monitors. She's been circling closer to this area for the past few hours. No interference, no artificial guidance, just pure natural behavior. Sarah had set up her cameras at strategic points around the release area, ready to document this crucial moment. This time, there would be no edited versions, no manipulated narrative, just the pure, unfiltered truth of nature taking its course. The rehabilitation team says the cub is ready, Linda announced, returning from her consultation with the wildlife experts. They've minimized human contact over the past few days. All natural instincts are intact. Chief Warner arrived with a team of environmental officials. The event would be carefully monitored to ensure everything proceeded naturally, with no repeat of the previous interference. The forest around them had been cleared of all artificial deterrent devices, allowing wildlife to move freely once again. Latest thermal imaging shows she's less than a mile away, Tom said quietly, his eyes fixed on his tracking display, moving steadily in this direction. Her behavior patterns are completely normal now, exactly what we'd expect from a mother searching for her cub. Jack felt a profound sense of rightness as he watched the final preparations. This was how things should have been from the start. Nature allowed to take its course without manipulation or interference. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. Sarah's cameras captured the transformation of the cub as it sensed the approaching presence of its mother. The little one's behavior changed subtly, becoming more alert, more focused on the forest around them. Natural instincts suppressed during the separation began to resurface. Movement in the tree line, Linda whispered, pointing to a subtle shift in the foliage. The mother bear had arrived, her presence commanding yet cautious. She emerged slowly from the forest, her natural behavior a stark contrast to the artificially induced patterns they'd documented earlier. The reunion unfolded with a beauty that no staged event could have matched. The cub, recognizing its mother's presence, moved with increasing confidence. The mother bear's approach was careful but determined, guided by instincts that had evolved over countless generations. "This is incredible," Sarah breathed, her cameras quietly documenting every moment. No artificial corridors, no deterrent devices, just pure, natural behavior. This is what we were fighting to protect. The wildlife experts watched with professional satisfaction as mother and cub moved closer together. Their body language told a story of recognition and natural bonding, untainted by human interference. The forest around them seemed to approve, the morning breeze carrying the sounds of nature returning to its normal rhythms. Tom's tracking data confirmed what they were witnessing. "All readings show normal behavior patterns," he reported softly. "Heart rates, movement patterns, everything indicates natural interaction. This is exactly how it should be." The environmental officials present took careful notes. This successful reunion would serve as a model for future wildlife protection protocols. The documentation would help ensure that natural processes would be respected and preserved, free from artificial manipulation. Linda's phone buzzed quietly with messages from other ranchers in the area. They reported increased wildlife activity across the region, natural movement patterns resuming as the forest's ecosystem gradually restored itself. The removal of the artificial deterrents was already showing positive effects. Jack watched with a profound sense of satisfaction as mother and cub began to move deeper into the forest together. His original instinct to help on that highway had been right, not because of any artificial scenario, but because it had led to the exposure and removal of unnatural interference in the forest's delicate balance. The investigation team has Finished cataloging all the removed equipment, Chief Warner informed them quietly. The evidence is overwhelming. No one will be able to attempt this kind of ecosystem manipulation again, at least not in our forests. Sarah's cameras captured the final moments as the bears disappeared into their natural habitat. The footage would tell a story of restoration and renewal, not just of a family reunion, but of an entire ecosystem returning to its natural state. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating a forest that was slowly healing itself. The artificial corridors were disappearing as wildlife resumed their natural patterns. The manipulation had been exposed and stopped, but more importantly, they had learned valuable lessons about the importance of letting nature take its own course. 2 weeks after the successful reunion, the Montana forest had undergone a remarkable transformation. Jack Mitchell stood at his favorite observation point along Highway 93, watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. The morning patrol had become a celebration of nature's resilience rather than a reminder of past controversies. The latest wildlife surveys are incredibly promising, Tom Reynolds said, joining him at the lookout point. He spread out his most recent data on the hood of the patrol car. Natural movement patterns have been fully restored across all sectors. The ecosystem is healing itself. Sarah Thompson's photographs of the bear reunion had become symbols of environmental protection across the nation. Her documentary series about the incident had sparked a nationwide conversation about wildlife conservation and the importance of maintaining natural habitats without human interference. The public response has been overwhelming, she said, showing them her latest publication. People are more aware now of how delicate these ecosystems are and how important it is to protect them from manipulation. Linda Hawkins had transformed her ranch into a wildlife observation station, working with environmental agencies to monitor and protect the forest's natural patterns. Her grandson Billy had started a youth conservation program, inspiring a new generation to become stewards of the wilderness. "You should see the young people who visit the ranch now," Linda said proudly. "They want to learn about wildlife protection, about maintaining natural habitats. Your story has inspired them, Jack." Chief Warner arrived with news from the State Environmental Protection Agency. New regulations had been implemented, strengthening the protections for wildlife and their habitats. Jack's experience had led to improved protocols for handling wildlife encounters, emphasizing the importance of understanding natural behaviors. "Your reinstatement ceremony made national news," Sandra reminded him with a smile. "But more importantly, it's changed how we approach wildlife protection. Every officer now receives additional training in recognizing and reporting suspicious activities in protected areas." Tom's monitoring stations had captured wonderful news. The mother bear and her cub were thriving in their natural habitat, their behavior patterns completely normal. Other wildlife in the area had also returned to their traditional territories. The artificial corridors now nothing but a fading memory. "Nature has an amazing ability to heal itself," Tom observed, showing them the latest tracking data. "Once we removed the artificial interference, the natural order restored itself remarkably quickly." Sarah's cameras had documented the entire transformation. Her footage showed the gradual return of natural wildlife patterns, the removal of artificial deterrents, and the restoration of the forest's delicate balance. The story had evolved from a single act of compassion to a testament of environmental protection. The most important lesson, Jack reflected, watching a group of deer move naturally through their traditional pathway, is that sometimes the best thing we can do is step back and let nature take its course. Our role is to protect, not to interfere. The morning light streamed through the trees, illuminating a forest that had returned to its natural rhythms. The mother bear and her cub had been spotted regularly, their behavior a perfect example of undisturbed wildlife. Their story had become a powerful reminder of the importance of preserving natural habitats. As they stood together at the lookout point, each of them had contributed to something larger than themselves. Jack's simple act of compassion had unveiled a truth that needed to be told. Sarah's documentation had brought that truth to light. Tom's scientific expertise had helped restore the natural order. Linda's dedication had helped protect it for future generations. The forest stretched out before them, alive with the sounds of undisturbed wildlife. The morning patrol that had once led to controversy had ultimately led to positive change, strengthening the protections for all wildlife in the region. "This is just the beginning," Sarah said, her camera capturing the beautiful morning scene. "People are more aware now, more invested in protecting these natural spaces. Your story, Jack, has helped create a legacy of protection." The sun climbed, higher, casting its warm light over a forest that was once again truly wild, its rhythms and patterns dictated by nature alone. The story of the highway patrolman and the bear cub had transformed into something much greater, a testament to the power of truth, compassion, and the importance of preserving our natural world. Dear listeners, we hope this story of Officer Jack Mitchell and the bear cub has touched your hearts and reminded you of the importance of protecting our natural world. If you've been moved by this tale of compassion, truth, and environmental protection, we invite you to join our community of storytelling enthusiasts. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring narratives that celebrate the beauty of nature and the power of human kindness. Hit the like button if you believe in the importance of wildlife conservation, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Together we can create more stories that make a difference in our world. Stay tuned for our next episode, where another remarkable journey awaits you.